Where did the first we ever heard about Jesus? When do you think that was?
When it was about 1 or 2. Sunday school.
Okay, but in Jesus' history, what was our first view of Jesus?
If you read into the prophets or not.
Okay.
When he was born.
When he was born. Okay. Well, that's kind of what I thought. We're coming up to the Advent season, and and not that this course is talking at this moment about Advent. We are still, actually, we're on a July 3rd lesson today. We're still working our way through this book, but with good information. And we're talking about creating word becomes flesh. So see if that gives you any other thoughts about when Jesus first appeared on the scene for the universe, for us, for all time, for whatever. Okay, so we're in John, the first chapter, verses 1 through 14, and we'll read them as we get to each section. But I want to tell you a little bit about John the Gospel, because what other Johns do you know about? John, the Gospel book of John. What other Johns do you know about in the Bible? John the Baptist.
Letters to John.
The letters, yes.
Revelation,
yes.
Somebody else?
Yeah. Think about who Jesus called. Not
Peter,
called.
James, and John.
John the Apostle. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's pretty. There are other Johns, I'm sure, but those are the ones that we hear about the most. And so the Gospel of John, they don't know. As always, they're not absolutely certain. Now it's interesting because I Googled it, and what I found quickly, I didn't really do a lot of research, suggested that John the Apostle wrote John, the Gospel of John, which does not seem quite possible because the book was written between 90 and 100 Common Era, meaning that he would have been maybe 120 years old at the time, maybe more. So it's not likely that it was he that wrote it, but it was written in that time frame, and that was after. And I'll be honest with you, I never heard this phrase before, the Roman-Jewish War. There was a conflict, of course, and that's when the temple was destroyed once again, and that was in the year 70 CE, Common Era. Hi, Greg.
Have a good week.
See ya.
You too. And this, of course, was after the previous destruction of the temple that we talked about just not too long ago was in 587 before the Common Era, when Babylon destroyed the temple. So this is 600 plus years later that it was destroyed again. And John, the Gospel of John, was written sometime after that, is what we're being told by the author. So certainly many scholars are believing that, are feeling that that's the case. Okay, so Christ was born and did his ministry during a pretty troubling time in the history of Israel, because that was when Rome had come in and was in control, and it was not an easy time for the people. And the followers were continuing to struggle and Christ's followers were struggling in two regards, because they were struggling under the Roman Empire, and they were also struggling under Judaism, because they had not, they were not yet a fully formed independent group. And so they were getting, their friends and neighbors who were Jewish were giving them some difficulties about them following Christ. It was not acceptable to them. So John, we can say who John was not. Okay, John was not John the Baptist. that we know that that's true. John was not the disciple. We kind of figured that out, that it was not John the disciple, who was the author refers to as John of Zebedee, and he was not the author of Revelation. So we got all those Johns, good for you, and he wasn't any of those. So, and to be perfectly honest, I'm thinking John, sometimes it was another author who wrote under a more renowned person's name, almost like a student. So I don't know that. That's just something that, had occurred to me, that maybe it wasn't, his name was not John. Maybe he was writing in that frame of reference. Okay, so the gospel was written and edited over some years. It didn't, the initial book of John, Gospel of John was not exactly as we see it. There was some editing that went on. Now, the author tells us in the Leader's Guide that the eyewitness, there was an eyewitness that John depended on. They liked to, it was, of course, when we have somebody who's been there, has seen it, who's experienced something, we get more information and more factual information from them than if it was just hearsay. So there was an eyewitness, and the author suggests that the eyewitness that John depended on was the unnamed disciple, the one that Jesus loved. Okay, so, and that could very well have been John, but we can't say that for sure because he wasn't named. Okay, so there are 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are kind of they're quite similar. They tell a story about Jesus and his ministry, and from his birth to his crucifixion and resurrection. John, the Gospel of John's a little bit different. It does not cover his birth. If you've ever noticed that, if you read the book of John, it doesn't talk about, the Bethlehem story, the stable, the shepherds, wise men. It doesn't talk about any of that. It does talk about his ministry, different things in his ministry, but it's not exactly in the chronological order even that the other Gospels are. So, okay, so the author tells us, and this is in the participants' guide, that John introduces Jesus' origins as pre-existent at the creation. So we think about Jesus appearing on the scene at his birth. Okay, that's when we imagine Jesus appearing on the scene. John has a very different opinion about that, a very different perception that he presents about that. And it's that Christ was actually existing before creation. He was there during creation. And so I always had the impression that John, the Gospel of John, the purpose of that was to kind of introduce us to and explain Jesus as the Son of God. And I guess in some ways that's it. Although there are many other things that John emphasizes that weren't necessarily emphasis in the other 3 Gospels. Okay, so he has a 3-year ministry. He talks about the 3-year ministry of Jesus, and it's interesting. And I did not go through and identify these situations, but the author tells us that there are 3 different Passovers talked about in John. Is that okay? Because of course Jesus had a 3-year ministry. Passover happens every year, so we hear about the one Passover, which happened was just around Holy Week when Jesus was taken captive and he was crucified. That Passover we all know, but there were 2 others that were mentioned in John as well. So that's the only place we hear about those. Okay, and in his description of the Last Supper, that's where we hear about the foot washing. Okay, so that's in there. And he talks also in about, as I mentioned, the unnamed disciple who Jesus loved. And there's also a fairly long farewell that Jesus gives in John that you don't see in other gospels. Okay, so that's a little bit of background on John. I thought it was all interesting because most of it was new to me, so I enjoyed learning those things very much. Okay, so the first section that we're going to talk about is John chapter 1, verses 1 through 3b. In the beginning was Logos. Okay, now I'm going to, before we read it, though I didn't want to give you a little bit of information about what we're going to read. And it's written as a hymn or a poem. And in fact, in some translations, it's actually written out in verse form. Okay, not true with the translation we have. This is just in paragraphs, but it was written out in verse form. So I know. The reason I wanted to tell you about that is listen to see if you hear anything that kind of reminds you of poetry. Okay, so in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. Sort of sounds poetic. I feel it does. I feel like that in the beginning was the Word, and then the word is repeated. The Word was with God, and then it goes on, the Word was God. It kind of falls into a poetic sort of pattern there. He was in the beginning with God. And we've learned too that in other scriptures we read where repetition is important for identifying what's important. And so there's a lot of repetition in this particular section. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. So it does sound a bit poetic. Okay, so the phrase, it starts with in the beginning. Where did we hear that before? Genesis. Where in Genesis?
Beginning.
The very beginning. The very beginning of Genesis, yes. Genesis 1:1, in the beginning. And this tells us was the Word. What?
I was just reading something's on the computer screen.
Oh, there's a warning.
Yeah.
It's just complaining that I don't have the right firewall.
Okay.
That's okay.
It comes up every half hour or so.
Okay, so Jesus and the disciples, of course, were Jewish, right? So they were familiar with old scriptures. They were familiar with the scriptures of the Jewish, of the Torah and all of that. So they were very familiar, and they were familiar with the Hebrew and with the creation story. Okay, so Jesus was familiar with it, but let's be honest, he was familiar with it not from reading the scriptures, but from experiencing it firsthand, you could say. Okay, so the main character of this part is, who would you say is the main character of this section? I'm sorry? God. And another.
I stole Jan's answer. That wasn't very fair, was it?
I think Anna said it. I was
Anna
thinking
said
it.
Sorry, Anna.
Okay, so God, of course, he's the main character, but there's another character who's there's really focus on also.
The Word.
The Word. Okay, and the word in Greek is logos. So you'll see the word logos here, even in the beginning was logos, is the title of this little section in the participant book there. And that's what logos means. Logos means word. And it seems if you read that, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So the logos, you could say, that was a a companion, a co-worker is what the author suggests in creation. Certainly there and active in creation. And so it's
almost a personification of when God says, "Let there be light," those words come into existence.
mhm.
So it makes me think of the book that you guys are reading in book group, that the spoken word brings to life that which was only written before.
Ah, okay. All right. Good point. Other thoughts? Okay, so in John 1, the scholars see some, the author used the word intertwines plot lines, and I like that vision. It kind of intertwines plot lines, and this I had to look up. Cosmological. There's the one plot line is cosmological, and I had a feeling what that was, but I thought I better look it up so I could more than have just a feeling, and that has to do with creation. Okay, so the one plot line has to do with creation, and the other plot line is historical, with about historical people and events. Okay, so these two things kind of become intertwined in this section. And nothing was created without the words participating. Okay, so if John is talking in, he's one of the Gospels, and if he's talking about the Word and being there prior to creation, so that the Word could be involved with creation, and like I said, if this is part of the Gospel, who is he pointing to as Logos, or the Word? Jesus. Okay, so when that's when we have, that's the answer to the first question. Where does Jesus first show up on the scene? Jesus shows up on the scene long before we knew him as being born in a baby in Bethlehem. He's there from prior to the beginning. The beginning is prior to creation. So Jesus was, next time someone asks you the question, when does Jesus show up? You say, "Ooh, prior to creation," not just as a baby in Bethlehem. Although we know how important that event is, and we'll be talking about that a little bit more.
But that's our triune God.
I'm sorry?
That's our triune God.
Yes, right.
So all three were prior to creation.
That's true. Yes. Well, how did the Spirit? Yes, the Spirit was.
Yeah, and it's right on. So it's the Ruach in the beginning.
Yes.
There was a wind that swept over the face of the.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that wind is the Ruach, which is the same word. It's the Hebrew word for the Holy Spirit.
Spirit. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Did you hear? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Right.
So the wind of the Spirit is there. The Word is what's used to speak things into existence.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about God the Creator as the one embodying all that.
Okay. See, that wasn't made clear. I'm glad thank you for asking that question, because that they were three, and they were already as the persons they would be.
Well, and I think we teach it that way because we're looking for it.
Okay.
So not every tradition would see that as a Trinity, but we as Trinitarian believers,
but the Spirit is related to the wind that was mentioned in Genesis.
It's one and the same,
right? And Christ was the Word, and God was the Creator, and the three together were one in creating them. Okay.
I still miss Bob Glassmeyer, who would be fighting you on it.
Is that right, Whitty?
That is just what went through my mind.
Yeah.
Really?
What would he say?
Bob Glassmeyer just was continually wrestling with the definition of Trinity, how it worked, what it looks like, how we talk about it, and just conceptualize it.
And you know what?
And that's a mystery.
He knows now.
Yep.
That's what I keep telling myself when, geez, I can't grasp it. It doesn't make sense. I can't grasp it. But you
We
know.
said that at his funeral, actually. He said, now he understands the Trinity.
Oh, is that right? Yeah. So, okay. All right. So the next section is 3C through 5. And this is, let me see what they refer to this. Life has come into being. Okay. And 3C through 5. So it's just a small section here. What has come into being in him was life. And the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Okay, so this is the introduction of some of John's favorite words are right in here. John throughout the gospel uses some words quite a bit. One was light. You heard that used several times in this section. Life or live or some living or some lived. Some reference to life. And world. Those are 3 things that John, as you read the Gospel of John, you'll pick out those words throughout. Okay, and you remember, of course, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Okay, we've heard that. That's a familiar phrase. So, how much light do you need to lighten the darkness?
Not much.
No, isn't that kind of amazing? And at this time of year, I miss the light because it's every night it's getting dark earlier and earlier and earlier. And it seems darker and darker. It's not the same darkness as in the summer for some reason. But really, it doesn't take a lot. It takes just a tiny little bit of light to overcome the darkness. So we have night lights everywhere in our house. So does everybody else have that?
Me.
Yeah, because we walk from one place to another without turning lights on, and it's not very safe. So, and we don't have any outside light to help us out. Sometimes when we lived in the suburbs, it was different because there were traffic lights and street lights and people's lights on their garages and that sort of thing. So we don't have any of that. So we provide just a tiny little bit of light, but it's all that we need. Okay, so even a small amount can make a difference. And of course, we know another reference from John where Jesus says, I am the light of the world. And that's chapter 8, verse 12. We're not reading that today, but that's part of it. Okay, then the next section is John 1, verses 6 through 9. And it talks about John gives witness to the light. Okay, so now we were just reading a section that they talk about being like poetry. Here's a little section that's not poetry. So see if you can feel a difference in the way you would read it. Okay, there was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. Do you feel a little difference there? It doesn't quite have the same rollicking sort of way to read it. It's a little flatter, but they're injecting some history here now. So he's talking about John the Baptist.
It's like a narrative.
Yes, right. More like a narrative. The other, to me, it seems like, how do you feel about the poetry in the first section? The first section being verse 1 through 5. How does that affect you? I don't know about you, but me, it's more an emotional kind of thing. And then we get to verses 6 through 9, and it's more factual. And do you see what I'm saying? It's not as an emotional kind of description of what's going on.
The first part is kind of like an anchor that that the presence of God has always been,
Mm-hmm.
will continue to be, and even if it's dark, that there is still hope and encouragement through that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Whereas it's more of an outside perspective. You know, we go from the inside and the being and kind of the self perspective to an outsider saying there was a man pointing to somebody else over there
Mm-hmm.
who
Mm-hmm.
was John, who was a witness. So
Okay.
to me,
Yeah.
it's the perspective of the speaking also,
Right.
narrating.
There's certainly a difference in the timing, as you mentioned. The anchor, it went all the way back in time, even before creation. And again, that's something too. Does anybody ever think about that? Everything we can say is, well, what was before that? Okay, well, what was before that? How do you grasp that when you think about that?
First the chicken or the egg.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. But even before the chicken or the egg, what was there? Something, talk about an anchor. It's almost like you have to have something to, how do you deal with that? Because this to me, because when I'm reading this, I'm thinking in the beginning, when we know the beginning of something, but even in the beginning, there's always something that preceded it.
I think that's the fascinating thing about our space exploration presently.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like every month there's a telescope or a satellite going deeper into the universe,
Right.
and beaming pictures or information back.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like the beginning keeps getting further back.
Yeah.
Existence of the universe it continues to be older, and we continue to get more clues.
I think it's fascinating too to think that the strongest telescopes may be actually looking at the beginning of our universe only because it took light so long to get there. Does that make sense to you? I mean, it takes maybe billions of years from the furthest stars for the light to get to the telescope. So if they're looking at it, they're seeing.
Was this a planet that God created?
Well, God created it all.
Are we on a planet?
Yeah. So it's to think about that, but yet the beginning of the universe, there was still something. What was before that?
It was the word, the Big Bang.
Okay.
You can see it though.
Yeah.
Oh, I used to look through telescopes a lot.
Did you?
Was my big thing.
Oh, that's right. I knew that. Yes.
And he would try to explain things to me, which I couldn't in any way comprehend. But what I did comprehend was how big our telescopes are in the United States. Certainly not as is. We aren't even close to seeing the universe.
Right.
And it's just mind-boggling that it is infinity.
Infinity.
We don't really accept what infinity is.
No.
And then I go back to what I have said many times in the past. Is God of earth or God of the universe? And when I asked a minister that one time, he really put me down. Oh, he really did. That's one of the reasons I left that church. But it was, the question still exists. There is no answer.
No.
What was the question?
It is God of the universe, though.
Is God of the universe or God of the earth?
God of the universe.
But our minds can't accept infinity. We human minds cannot understand what infinity is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we know it's endless, but can we even in any way imagine
Comprehend that?
endless?
But if you think of the prayers, like the Jewish prayers on Sabbath, are Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam, which is praise be to you, O God of the universe. That your mercy endures forever. So those are part of who we are as Christians and part of the Jewish tradition, as well as to recognize God of the universe.
Mm-hmm. True, but in all honesty, I wish God was just God of earth.
Oh.
Well, Satan is the ruler of the earth. Satan
I
has
wouldn't go that far, but he's certainly present.
Satan has control of the world. Well, isn't that, I forget where it talks about that. I have to look that up. Yeah, where does
in
it,
the Bible,
where
it
does it,
says that.
I have to go figure it out. I'll see if I can find it.
Well, Satan has more influence than we would like, but I guess I still hold on to that that God is far greater. So, okay, so we got off the track just a little bit, but that's not a problem at all.
Can I stay off the track just for a moment longer?
Sure.
As we're talking about light and darkness,
Mhm.
I just want to lift up that that has also been used, speaking of Satan and evil, that has been used to reinforce racism. That
Oh,
that people that have darker skin are somehow
less acceptable.
connected with the devil.
Oh, no,
or
that's
with
just ridiculous.
I'm saying that people have done that, and it is ridiculous and it's wrong, but it just needs to be said.
Yeah.
Because we talk about, and I did with Star Wars today, right? There's a light side and a dark side, and the dark side's the bad guys, and the light side's the good guys. Or the bad guys wear black in Western movies, and the good guys, Lone Ranger, is Silver Stallion and white and all that. So just to be very, very clear, that that a womb is dark also. All of creation was dark first, and that is certainly not a bad thing. That is a very positive thing. So just to be mindful, because there's that subliminal
Right.
messaging about light and dark. Light is good and dark is bad, and it's
Well,
not always that way.
I might as well throw this one out. Well, Jesus most likely did not have blue eyes and white skin.
Right.
I mean,
He's Arab.
yeah.
Yeah.
He's
dark
maybe he's
complected.
darker skin. I mean, it's,
And just think, even someone who starts out with fairer skin, if they're outside in the wilderness all the time, their skin gets darker.
So in plain words, I don't want a sunburn or suntan.
Suntan.
there's nothing wrong with the suntan.
Tan is fine.
Mhm.
So yeah, Jesus spoke Arabic.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Did he speak Aramaic? Is that that's a dialect? of
Aramaic, Greek, he,
Would have had a
all
bunch
that
of
stuff over there.
Okay. Somebody.
Aramaic was part of the Hebrew tradition, but there also would have been
Oh, I
Aramaic
see.
at the time.
Okay. Okay. They were better than I am.
Well, maybe
I
he
know
even-
one language,
Spoke many
not that well
languages.
even.
Maybe he even spoke Sanskrit.
Oh, do they speak Sanskrit? I thought that was
Not in
written.
that part of the world.
Besides, I thought that was written, but anyway. Okay.
We're back in John verse 6, right?
Okay, let me see. Oh,
That was the win.
I'm not ready to go to the next one yet. Okay, the author is suggesting that it went from the cosmological, who remembers what cosmological means, to do with creation. Okay, so he went in the first paragraph from which was cosmological, to the more historical in the second, to where he's talking about John the Baptist. Okay, and Jesus and John was looked at. I mean, he spoke about God differently than when they were hearing at the time. So there were people who thought he might be the one to come, and he made it very clear that that was not the case. He pointed people to Jesus, and behold, the Lamb of God. Now it's interesting when you think about cleansing the temple. Remember that story where Jesus went in and overturned? When do you think that happened in his ministry? When do we think about that?
Early on.
Yes, in John, it's early on. Yes, good for you. That was
Sometimes think of it just with the passion narrative.
in Holy
That's
Week.
what
Yes.
I was thinking too.
Yeah, because I guess I always thought that was like blasphemy to do something like that, and it was something that would turn the people against Jesus. But in this case, in John, again, one of these differences of John, the Gospel of John, it occurs very early in his ministry, and it was seen as a form of rebellion against the Roman Empire, because remember we said last week, was that last week, whenever, that the Babylonians, the Persians, one of the reasons they wanted the temple rebuilt was to have sort of a center where they could collect taxes and that sort of thing. And so in John, Jesus is rebelling against the Roman Empire, because that's where they were collecting taxes at the temple. That's where they knew people would come. Okay, Pastor's got some thoughts.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, John does teach by theme and not chronology, and the other Gospels, the Synoptics, as you said, are chronological.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what Jesus is pushing back is the unfair exchange.
Okay, yes.
And so I'm not sure it's so much, I mean, you could read into it, but
Not
I'm
so
not sure
much a
that's
political.
there.
Okay, so
I think
it's
Jesus is pushing back, saying that when you're changing from the secular currency to the temple currency, that needs to be a fair exchange, and the money changers were cheating people.
okay.
And so he was overturning that.
Okay, all right. Okay, so then we'll move on to John chapter 1, verses 10 through 13. And this is talking about the tragic rejection by his own. And we do recall in the other Gospels there was discussion about Jesus being rejected by his own people. And let's hear what John has to say. He was in the world. Now we're back. We're not talking about John the Baptist anymore. Now we're talking about Jesus Christ. He was in the Word. Okay. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him. Yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become the children of God, who were born not of blood or of will of the flesh or of the will of man, but of God. Okay, so it's kind of heartbreaking to think about that he was not accepted by his own people. But
they were looking for a military savior.
Right.
They
Yes,
wanted somebody to come and take care of the Romans with the sword.
Yes, right.
So they weren't.
How about what he was teaching? Did they like what he was teaching?
Well, the people did,
Mm-hmm.
but the Pharisees and Sadducees did not.
Right.
Because he was going against their rules.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so the goal of the Gospel of John is to lead the people to become children of God. That's the goal that John is, one of the goals that John has throughout. And to be born from above is to be born from God. Okay, so let me see, I don't think I'm at this section yet. Okay, the author tells us that it's God who gives the power to come to faith as a gift. Okay, so God gives us that gift to have faith. It's not maybe such a natural thing for us, but God gives us that gift to come to him in faith. And it's not the will of the flesh, but it's a gift from God. Okay. So flesh, being of the flesh, it's very often in the Bible, I think of that having a negative connotation. Does anybody else feel that way too? If something's of the flesh, you think of that often as being worldly and not spiritual and not following God. But
that's from Paul, because that's what he says of it.
Okay, but that's an understanding that we sort of have in our minds. So it is kind of interesting that we talk about, and here it has a negative connotation in verse 13, who were born not of blood or the will of the flesh, not the will of our being, of our bodily functions or bodily being, or of the will of man, but of God. And so there it actually has a sort of a negative connotation, but it can also have a positive connotation. Think of a positive connotation of the word flesh.
Incarnation.
The incarnation, exactly, yeah. And in fact, incarnation comes from a Latin word, carne, and carne means flesh. Meat, yeah. Chili con carne, yeah. But it means flesh. Okay, so what?
You got that.
It means flesh. So it, so there can be a positive because we see that Christ came in the flesh, and so that's that's certainly a positive. That's not a negative thought for us to think about Christ being in the flesh. Okay, so then verse 14 takes us to the more positive meaning of flesh. And let's see what verse 14 says. The Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. And so we don't have a birth story, with Bethlehem and the stable and all of that, but this is a pretty profound birth story. Where the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory. Imagine, you know what it's like. We believe in God, we feel God, we see what God does, but we don't physically see God. But this was an opportunity to physically see the Word, and Christ came and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. So here, flesh is positive, and the words don't fully don't only speak. The Word doesn't only speak, but the Word is actually literally living among us. And I mentioned already about incarnation. We have to understand he was 100% human and he was 100% God. Okay, there's another thing it's hard to wrap your head around. But
I do multiplication and not addition.
Yeah.
1 times 1 is still 1.
Okay. Oh, okay. Oh,
You
there's
want to think about it that way.
1 times 1 is still
So
1.
the Trinity is 1 times 1 times 1.
Ah, that's beautiful. I never heard that before. Okay. Anybody else have a thought about that? 1 times 1 times 1 is still 1. And 1 times 1 is still 1. So, okay, interesting. Hadn't heard that before.
I love the part on page 39 where it points out that living among us, the word is tabernacles.
Oh, yes,
Yes.
Let's see. Yes, I have that here. Let me see. No. It's and that's exactly what I was going to read for you. Lutheran theologian Nils Gregerson, are you familiar with Nils Gregerson? Names this deep incarnation. This is on page 39, the second paragraph down. He says, in the incarnation, the divine logos, the Word, is united with the very basic physical matter of creation. The flesh is, you know what? This isn't the tabernacle part, is it?
It's right below. Keep reading.
Oh, okay. The flesh that is assumed of Jesus of Nazareth is not only the man Jesus, but also, now I think this is also the entire realm of humanity, animal and plant life, even the soil itself. So we're not in, sorry, I got away from tabernacle. I thought that was
No, it's right below.
Yeah, I'll get there. But the flesh that is assumed of Jesus of Nazareth is not only the man Jesus, but also the entire realm of humanity, animal and plant life, and even soil itself. Again, it's pretty hard to comprehend.
It kind of gets to that's the Native American tradition.
Right. Yes, that's what I was.
The Great Spirit is in all things and all beings.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So that is not something that previously had been taught as as a Christian concept,
Mhm.
that God could only be in humans. But I
Right.
think there's always been edges in mysticism and
Well,
other traditions that
even-
teach God to
yeah.
everything.
In Judaism, they talk about the even like the rocks that people are incarnated in the rocks too. Things like that.
Incarnated in the rocks. I mean, Jesus does say the very rocks will cry out.
Right.
If the people don't do this job.
Godspell.
Yeah, there you go.
Godspell. Mhm. So John's gospel shows us Christ in all things at the heart of biological, material, and social life. So the word, the word is in everything, is in everything. Okay, so here we go. This is the part, and I'll read it because it makes more sense probably than I would be able to paraphrase. The word lived among us. This is the next paragraph. Here, living means tabernacling, pitching a tent. Okay. Rabbis use the same word for God's Shekinah or dwelling. Jesus is God's Shekinah. In becoming flesh, the Logos tabernacles with us. So, as becoming flesh, he pitches his tent with us, recalling the Exodus. Okay, so I think that's always so important. I love when they do that. They refer back. It kind of unifies the Bible because so often when I was growing up, you had the Old Testament and you had the New Testament, but there are many, many connections in between that aren't always so evident. And this is one of them.
So some of the people that some of the Jewish roots people, the Jews that believe in Jesus, there's a belief that he was actually born in the fall. Because that's when he would have tabernacled with them. So at the Feast of Tabernacles is one belief of when Jesus was actually born.
Because we don't know when Jesus was actually born.
Because the shepherds would not be out in the fields in December in Israel. It'd be too cold. They wouldn't have their flocks out.
Is it too cold there? I'm not sure of the.
I never researched that on my own. That's just something that I heard. I don't know.
The latitude for Israel is almost the same as what we have here in Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay. So that would make sense. It would be pretty cold.
It doesn't get quite that cold, but there's certainly the change of seasons is very similar to ours.
Right. And probably in the desert, it's more a greater difference between day and night. I would think it gets much colder.
The desert's not particularly pronounced in Israel.
Oh, okay.
It's a little bit more to the
east.
Sahara or to the south.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, so in becoming flesh, the Logos tabernacles with us, recalling the Exodus, and the same word is used in Revelation 21, verse 3. So the Shekinah is and what do you know about the tabernacle? What do you remember about the tabernacle from the Old Testament?
What do you want to know?
Oh boy! Something brief.
There was God's dwelling place.
God's dwelling place.
How's that brief?
There you go. Loved it. And what was within it? The tabernacle. When they carry it from one place to another, what was within the tabernacle?
All kinds of stuff.
Okay, yeah, but most important.
10 Commandments. Yeah.
The ark.
The ark and it contained the 10 Commandments. Okay. The word "we" is important. All right. Those who first read or heard the gospel in the late 90s of the first century were not eyewitnesses to the life and ministry of Jesus. Remember, we talked about that. They didn't even have an eyewitness. They didn't have somebody that when they were reading this, they didn't have somebody who actually lived with Jesus and that sort of thing. Yet the author declares, we have seen his glory. We, like the original audience for this gospel, are not eyewitnesses, but we can still experience the glory of beholding Jesus. They say it so well. Anybody have any thoughts? And I say they because recall we have two authors. So. But you can say they now for one person too. That's
Pronouns.
yeah, that's a little newer. Okay, so the word today. In October 2017, Pope Francis made a phone call to ask questions of the astronauts. I don't remember this in the International Space Station. Anybody recall this? No. In light of your experiences, what are your thoughts regarding the place of man in the universe? The 6 scientists responded, telling him about the wonder of seeing Earth from space. Okay, it must be amazing to see something like that. Pope Francis then pointed out a painting in the room where he was speaking that is based on the Divine Comedy. The Divine Comedy is a narrative poem written by Italian poet Dante Alighieri in the 14th century. The poem refers to love as a force which moves the sun and the other stars. With that in mind, Pope Francis asked the crew, "What do you think about referring to love as the force that moves the universe?" There's some reference here. Okay, in a sense, the Gospel of John wants readers to grapple with these same big questions. What do you think about God, the Logos, Jesus, love as that force that moves the universe? The Gospel of John will show us tragic divisions, political conspiracy, and rejection of Jesus. Yet at its beginning, John's Gospel reveals a profound logic of love at the heart of the universe. Jesus present at God's side in creation, coming to dwell with us in our flesh. Okay. Now, we have some time, well, not as much time as I thought, for some questions. How does the Word function with God at creation? That's first question number 2.
It's making creation.
Participating in the creation of creation. Yeah. Yeah, creation is a noun. Yeah. Where was I going?
And a verb.
And a verb. Well, not creating. Creating. Okay. So how did he function before? How did the Logos function before?
Before what?
Creation. Before creation.
Well, it was just there.
Just then. How do we, is there any concept of what was there before the creation? It was void, I know. It was chaos. Makes my brain hurt. I don't know about you. Could you even imagine? Okay, question 1 in the word today. Our study today gives me hope for my life and for the world. Do you agree or disagree? They suggest we refer to verses 12 and 13. So I'll read those again. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood or of the will of the flesh or of the will of God, of man, but of God. So did that give you hope for your life and for the world? Yeah.
Supposedly. Can you say more about supposedly?
Who said that?
I was watching this time. I saw your lips move.
Well, that's what John's trying to point out. That we should get hope and have hope for our life,
Mm-hmm.
for the world.
Yeah.
But you know what? That's pretty hard to even think about right now. Week in and week out, we talk about the wars in Ukraine and things like that, and for the world. I personally have a lot of trouble even reading about it or listening to it on the news, because I think I just like every other human being, like peace. Well, like most human beings seem to be fighting for possession of of land. I mean, it's just so unacceptable.
Mhm.
But we're supposed to have hope for our life in the world. Did that answer what went through my mind?
Thank you. And I think that connects up with what we heard in Jeremiah today, that Susie read for us. You know, that I think for me, the hope is that God's covenant is written on my heart. And so even when I'm straying or doing wrong stuff or in the process of asking forgiveness or trying to reconcile or whatever it might be, that God is still holding on tight. So even through the wars, God is still holding on tight. And, you know, you talk about Ukraine. I mean, the Ukrainians continue, their resilience is astounding.
Astounding. Yeah.
You know, as they're continue to fight back against all odds and very isolated from many other parts of the world.
Yeah.
And now with the grain shipments being stopped, I mean, that's huge. You know,
Does it affect?
that they're not stopping. Yeah, and they grew their harvest in their fields, even around the landmines that are still there.
Yeah.
You know, just they're not ready to stop.
Oh, but one more step in the wrong direction is the nuclear warfare that they're discussing.
Mm-hmm.
If that happens, our world is pretty sad. We'll be pretty sad.
It is deplorable to consider destruction on that scale. We've already done that, though.
Yeah.
I mean, the U.S. was the
We
one
did.
that unleashed
We did
times, right? So it doesn't need to be the end, but certainly one would hope. You know, it's kind of like an addiction. You really want someone to hit rock bottom and be able to start in a different trajectory. And I guess we haven't hit rock bottom yet.
We're getting there.
A pretty awful place to be. But then, I mean, then you see all the people reaching out, you know, in the floods. You just have also a flood of help and support. You know, just even what during the Phillies game the other night, there's like, hey, you know, text for help for Hurricane Ian. You know, it's there are some responses to the suffering in the world that are like light and darkness. It might be a little, but I think there is that human nature, that thing that God wrote on our hearts, that not everybody in all times, but there is that pushback towards life and resilience and being community. And that's what I did a burial yesterday for Berks County, and it was the remains of 7 children whose families, for one reason or another, did not claim them, and they've been sitting on a shelf, some of them for up to 12 years in the DA's office, or the coroner's office. So the DA, the coroner, Adeline Rose, and myself, the folks at the hospital, laid them to rest. And we had a fabulous turnout. And the one woman I talked to, I said, what brought you here? She said, I saw it in the newspaper and I just needed to be part of it. And I thanked her for being that part of community. I mean, to have, you know, and there's news coverage before, but it didn't have, as far as I know, there were no reporters there at the service. You know, Senator Schwenk came, as she always does, not with a whole lot of paparazzi, but just because she believes in this. It was beautiful to see community coming together. No one, as far as I know, was directly related to any of the children, but we embraced them as our own. And Adam and Chloe Saftiri, who lead the Adeline Rose Foundation, have purchased their own niche in the columbarium right by these children and said, these are now our children too. And so the child that they had that died, and these 7 kids and themselves and their living children are all going to have a space together. And so that gives me hope. You know, there's a lot of horrible stuff going on, but there's some really beautiful moments of light.
And you know, I've heard people complain about our newspaper, and you know that, you know, there's not news on the front page, and there is news. There's news that, you know, we have to we have to hear, and it gives us a little balance that not everything in the world is awful, but that one section you can count on being something positive, generally, maybe not always, but positive about what's happening in our community. And so there, it's nice to see that there are things like that are happening. And
I must admit, I read that in the newspaper too, and it really inspired me that, wow, that is really a neat thing. Obviously, I never even knew about anything like that. So I'm glad that article was in.
Right.
It was the first time Adam and Chloe had seen a newspaper article about this happening in Montgomery County. And so they went to the coroner's office and they said, hey, do you have a situation where people are unclaimed here? And so we just buried the children yesterday. There are still adults that are unclaimed. I was talking with John Fielding, the coroner, yesterday after the service, and he said, we're looking for someone to do something similar for the adults that are unclaimed. There's a financial piece to it too.
Right.
And I think that's part of the reason people stay unclaimed, is not having the finances to be able to get people arrested.
The age range of the children?
They were all either stillborn or died shortly after birth.
Oh, okay.
And so all of them were infant or never took a breath outside of the womb. But the one that had been at the coroner's office longest would have been 13. And the most recent, I think, was from, if I remember, in fact, I had the list for prayers today, was from, I think, 2017. So the youngest would have been 4 or 5 years ago. Had died 4 or 5 years ago. I have their birthdays in my bag.
Wow. Okay, so
there's hope.
There is.
In life and death.
And for the world. Because these things aren't happening just here. They're happening everywhere. So it's good to
all the people giving CPR in South Korea with the crush from the Halloween. Just so many people were giving CPR in that situation.
Right? I didn't hear that.
What happened?
152 or 153 people were killed. There was a big Halloween celebration. In South Korea, right out in Seoul. I think one of the neighborhoods in Seoul.
So many people in such a small area. I
Moved
couldn't
into like
believe
an
all those
alley.
people were
Yeah, it
there.
was a real tight.
And they started to move, and then I don't know when
They got crushed.
people got panicked.
Too many
and-
people participated.
Wow.
82 injured and over 150 that were killed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huge crowd.
And you said people were
What, the people just swarmed each other?
they
In a
just
way,
went into
yeah,
a small
there's
space.
Too many people. Yeah, they got constricted going from a bigger space.
And then they panicked and
Evidently, I haven't. Not all the details have been in the news that I've seen.
no. Wow.
I think maybe just one. Always
Oh,
take
yeah.
a little someone just someone falling in the
Right.
crowd like that. That would
Can
just,
yes,
would
yeah.
just- yeah.
Did
When
you
I
ever-
picture on the
Did you
news,
ever
it's
experience anything like that?
I did with turkeys.
Oh,
Turkeys,
okay.
turkeys will smother themselves. They, they'll
They'll go into a group.
yeah, they will go on into a huge group and smother themselves.
Well, I went one time to our family went to the Pennsylvania Farm Show. Have you ever been up there?
Not for a long time.
Well, there had been, and I think they've changed it since then, but there had been a corridor that you go through to get into the large exhibition area or whatever. And that's where we were supposed to meet. Charlie and I were together, and Allison and Earl had gone ahead of us. They were already in the exhibition area. And we were in such a crushing crowd that I lifted Charlie up so that he could breathe up above us. And believe it or not, then we hear the horses are coming. So they were bringing horses through that corridor then. And it was a very frightening experience. And how it was relieved, I can't even tell you, because I can't imagine how everything got congested like that. but somehow we got through. So it's a frightening experience to be, you can't turn, you can't go anywhere. So it was, I had not heard the part about people doing CPR and helping each other that way.
Were they getting resuscitated?
I didn't hear of any that were successfully resuscitated. I don't know what the statistics are.
Okay, well, we'll finish here with the memorization and then the closing prayer. We'll read the memorization together. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory. And the closing prayer, let us pray. Gracious God, you have come to be with us in every sense, incarnate in creation, in plants and animals, air and rocks, and in our own lives, all in the power of Jesus' love. And we are glad. We give thanks. Amen. May the Lord watch between you and me while we're absent one from another. Amen. Amen. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like they turned the heat off.
Yeah, it's not as hot as it was.
Yeah. It's low.
I don't know how.
Put her sweater on. It's not so hot. I don't have that.
I thought it's just me because I'm always cold. So I'm usually